This is chapter 12 that deals with organizational culture and change. In our first brief lecture, this one, we're going to look specifically at organizational culture, what it is, the influence that it plays on organizations, the different types or levels of organizational cultures, and how they are in fact affected or how they in fact affect the organization. So that's what we're going to look at this brief lecture. Well, if you recall, when we spoke of chapter 5, we spoke of national culture, and we said that national cultures are a set of shared beliefs, values, and norms within people or population in a nation. Well, similarly, an organizational culture is a system of shared beliefs and values that guide behavior in organizations. It's the collection or shared system of norms and values and traditions that people that are in organizations have in common or hold or identify with. That is what organizational culture is. And the way that people in organizations become acculturized is through this concept of socialization. That's how you learn the culture of the organization, through socialization. And that can be through training, but it could also be through some informal interaction, as you'll see, through stories, through basically people observing how others in the organization dress and speak and basically act, and that's how you learn how you should act, how you should behave. That's how you become socialized, and that's how you adopt new people, that is, adopt the organizational culture. And that's also how the organizational culture is reinforced. So we want to see, again, the types of the levels of this culture and the impact this organizational culture will tend to have on the organization and on the ability of the firm to fulfill its objectives as dictated by the plan. Says here the best organizations have positive cultures, and that's true. Positive cultures respect members, they're customer driven, they're performance oriented, they encourage positive work behaviors, and they discourage dysfunctional behaviors. This actually speaks to us about the role and the importance of organizational culture in organization as well as in the entire management process. If you recall, in chapter 11 we spoke about organizational structure as the vehicle in which organizational goals are actually implemented. That's what we use, that's what we use to fulfill or to realize the objectives that we would have determined in the planning stage. Well, organizational structure can therefore be seen as the bones of the operation. An organizational culture can be seen as the bloodline. It's basically the transfusion, or it's the life-giving force that enables the structure to help the firm to implement its plan. That's what organizational culture does. And as that life-giving force, it has to reinforce and it has to assist these positive or create this positive environment that's going to help the firm realize its objectives. And the way that it does that is by doing these things, respecting the members of the organization, leveraging that human capital, being customer driven. As we said, we looked at the bottom up pyramid in chapter 1. We have to be customer centric because it's the customers that allow us, it's their value utility, it's how they value things that will allow us to gain core competencies and competitive advantages. Performance oriented, making sure that we reach the levels and the potential that we want for ourselves. Encouraging that positive work behavior, making sure that people in the organization know what they need to do and are committed to doing that. And we want to ensure that people also do not behave in ways that actually detract from our mission, from our objective, from what we want to achieve. So organizational culture is that blood. It is that life-giving force that creates that environment that supports the structure that in turn obviously helps us to implement our strategy, leads to performance, leads to success, leads to competitive advantage. There are different levels of organizational culture. You can think of the organizational culture kind of like an iceberg, what you see above, but also what is below. What is above is normally driven or is a manifestation of what is below. Not necessarily all the time, as I will show you, I will demonstrate, but it is normally a manifestation of what is below. That is the observable culture, what you can see by walking around and feeling and interacting with the organization through your senses. That is what we call the observable culture, visible actions and events. The unobservable or the core culture is those underlying values, those principles. If you remember when we talked about the strategic process, those core values or core principles that guide the organizations and that guides the behavior, the attitudes, the mindsets of the organizational members as they operate. That's the core culture. You don't see that, but you see the manifestation of it through the observable culture. Well, what's some elements of that observable culture? Well, it could be things like heroes, okay? Who does the organization portray as someone being heroic, someone being a champion? It can be seen through ceremonies, rites, and rituals, the legends and the stories that are told in the organization, and the metaphors or the symbols, that the type of language, type of symbolism that the organization uses to communicate. All of those things can be indicators of the observable culture. So let's use Xavier University, for example. When you go around Xavier University, you may see some pictures or you may hear stories about certain people. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., okay, for example, is a hero, someone that is portrayed as being heroic at the university. That tells you a little bit about the culture, what we believe in, what Xavier believes in, what they actually subscribe to. So you see it through your heroes, the ceremonies, the rites, and the rituals. Think about the types of convocation. We have a Black History Month convocation. That ceremony, again, is a manifestation of our culture, our core principles of promoting the African American educational system. The legends and the stories that are told about people. Dr. Francis, for example, is a great conveyor of these stories and these legends. He speaks about the people that have graduated from Xavier previously, the alumni, and some of those people who were major players in the community and in the world even. Those stories help us to understand again what Xavier stands for, and our metaphors, our symbols, the types of symbolisms that you see even in the artwork that you see around campus. All those things again tell you or communicate to you as a student, but also people that might be visiting Xavier, what Xavier really stands for. And so the observable culture, as I said before, is a manifestation or representation of the core culture. And those core culture, those core principles, those are the core values or underlying assumptions and beliefs that shape and guide people's behavior in organizations. It's really how you feel about things. It's what you subscribe to within. It's not necessarily what you put on a logo, but it's what you live by, if you will. Okay, core values and beliefs core values are beliefs and values shared by organizational members. So in order for a core value to really be a part of a culture, of a core culture, it has to be relatively shared by the community in the organization, by organizational members. So this is how we do business. We don't necessarily have to say it, but if we all believe in that, we all have those principles tied within us, then it's something that's going to be a part of your core culture. Think about the people that work at an organization like Google. Many of them subscribe to that cultural principle or that value of innovation. Okay, the need to, always be creative. And a lot of them, again, have that as a core value or principle in their lives, and they utilize that value in their business. And that core value, that culture that is manifested in the way that Google does business, okay, in terms of their heroes and the things that we saw before, the ceremonies, the rituals, all that, that comes from that observable culture, or that unobservable culture, that core value of innovation. So some of the important values that organizations may have, core cultural values, things like performance excellence. We want to be the best. We want to continue to be the best. So some companies are very, very ambitious, very driven. The people in the organization are very driven. I just spoke about innovation. How about social responsibility? Think about a company like Novo Nordisk, where many of the people that work for that organization are very, very tied to or identified very highly with things like social responsibility and sustainability. And therefore, the culture of that organization tends to demonstrate a real major concern for things like environmental sustainability and social responsibility. Some organizations highly promote integrity, worker involvement, customer service, and lastly, teamwork. All of these are very positive cultural values that will help a firm support its strategy and help a firm realize that competitive advantage. We can also speak in terms of culture of multiculturalism, and this has to do with the firm's willingness to be inclusive, pluralistic, and respect diversity. Multicultural organizations, in fact, they have a culture that with core values that respect diversity and support multiculturalism. Now, there is a distinction between respecting diversity and accommodating diversity. And when accommodating diversity, people or organizations accept that people are different, that subgroups are different, but those organizations do not necessarily care to leverage those differences. They, in fact, are just accommodating those differences, and sometimes they hope those differences would go away. In a multicultural organization, the top levels of the organization are accepting of differences across and between individuals and groups and actually try to leverage those differences, those uniqueness, to help the organization to be more successful. So it does not see, a multicultural organization does not see diversity as a bad thing. In fact, it sees it as a very positive thing that it can utilize to improve things like creativity, to improve things like innovation. And so because of diversity, the firm is actually going to be successful. That's what culturalism is actually. And so the characteristics of a type of organization like that, very pluralistic, many different entities within the organization are very accepting of different entities. There's a lot of integration of those entities throughout the organization. So it's not a case where you have basically different groups. Let's look at it from an ethnic perspective, different ethnic groups, but only one ethnic group is represented at the very top. No, in a multicultural organization, you're going to have that pluralistic ethnicity that's going to be represented across all levels of the organization. So you're going to have different people of different races at all levels of the organization. A lot of informal network integration, meaning that there's a greater level of socialization even beyond the formal structure. There's an absence of prejudice and discrimination. Again, this is not about trying to minimize the amount of cultural differences that there are in the organization. It's about utilizing those differences and minimum intergroup conflict. So some of those characteristics are what you will see in a highly developed multicultural organization. Again, this type of organization embraces diversity rather than trying to run away from it. The last thing that we can look at is what we call organizational subcultures. And what are these? Well, it says here that there are groups of people who share similar beliefs and values based on their work or personal characteristics. So within cultures, even within national cultures, you will have groups of individuals that will identify more closely with others than they will with necessarily the entire cultural landscape. And that happens as well in organizational subculture. Think about in the United States. Well, most people that live in the United States will identify themselves as American, okay? but within or along with being American, they might also consider themselves to be an Italian American or an Irish American. Those things are subcultures. Or even people that live in New Orleans. Where do you come from? New Orleans. So you embrace the New Orleans subculture while still being part of the American national culture. In the organization, you can have similar experiences. People can share similar beliefs with others in their organization because of the type of work they do or even their personal characteristics. Okay, so you might have a subculture based around gender in an organization. Females are based upon males. You might have a subculture based upon religion or based upon certain activities, certain sporting activities, or certain types of social activities. All of those are what we call subcultures. Subcultures are not necessarily problematic. Okay, just like informal structures, when we talked about organizational structures, we mentioned the benefits of informal structure. They can help people to basically become included in the organization. They can help in terms of bridging gaps. Those things are true. Organizational subcultures help people to have greater commitment even to the organization and to feel included in, let's say, a group or in a team. But they can become problematic if there is the chance or the opportunity for this thing called ethnocentrism. And if you remember what ethnocentrism was from chapter 5, it is the belief that one subculture is superior to all others. So it's like saying, you know what, Italian Americans are the best. The way that we eat, the way that we think, the way that we act, that's the best. Your way of doing things is inferior. If you say, you know what, the way that we do things in New Orleans, our life, our livelihood, our way of music, all of those things are just better than yours. That's what you call ethnocentrism. And that is actually the antithesis of multiculturalism, because that suggests there is some level of superiority amongst cultures. Some cultures are more superior than others, and therefore that creates the situation where you have minority and majorities conflict. You don't have acceptance, and that can lead to some serious problems and breakdowns in organization. So subcultures themselves are not necessarily problematic or bad, but it is the practice of ethnocentrism that can lead to problems within an organization. So this is the first brief lecture in chapter 12. In our second brief lecture, we're going to look more specifically at organizational change and the way change occurs, the change process, and also some of the issues related to change and how as managers we can overcome that.